I didn't plan to fall for her. It just happened somewhere between her silence and the way she held me like the world had stopped moving. It was one of those evenings when the city felt softer than usual. The kind of evening where rain brushed against the windows like a half-forgotten song. I'd only stopped by the small art cafe because I needed somewhere quiet to think. My friends had all gone somewhere loud, somewhere bright, and I just didn't have it in me that night. The place was dimly lit, warm with the hum of conversation and the smell of roasted beans. Paintings lined the brick walls, all of them slightly crooked, like they'd been hung by someone who cared more about feeling than perfection. I liked that. It felt honest. That's when I saw her. She was sitting near the window, not facing the crowd, but angled toward the rain, sketchbook open in front of her. The light from the street outside caught the faint strands of gray in her hair, turning them into silver. She looked calm, but not the kind of calm that comes easily. More like someone who's had to teach herself how to be. The seat beside her was empty. I don't know what made me ask if it was taken. Maybe the quiet confidence in the way she didn't seem to notice anyone else, or maybe the simple fact that she looked like she belonged to that moment in a way I wanted to understand. She looked up when I spoke. Her eyes met mine. Not searching, not inviting, just steady. "Go ahead," she said, her voice low, gentle, almost like the start of a song. For a while, we sat in silence. The rain played softly on the glass, and I could hear the scratch of her pencil moving across paper. Every few minutes, she'd glance up at the window, as if studying how the water shaped the world outside. When the waiter brought my coffee, I reached for a napkin, the same one she happened to reach for. Our fingers brushed. Just a moment. But it was one of those small, impossible moments where something ordinary turns significant. Her hand was warm. She smiled. A small, polite curve of the lips, nothing more. But it stayed with me longer than it should have. Eventually, I found the courage to speak. "You draw?" I asked, stupidly obvious, but it made her laugh softly. "Only when I forget what words can't fix," she said. There was something about the way she said it that made me forget how to breathe for a second. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was experience. The kind that makes you wonder what someone's had to live through to sound that peaceful about pain. We talked a little after that. Nothing deep, just easy conversation about the rain, about how the world feels slower when everyone else is rushing. But underneath it all was a quiet hum, a pulse I couldn't name yet. When I left that night, I didn't even know her name, but somehow I knew I'd see her again. It was getting late when we finally stepped out of the cafe. The city had quieted, the kind of quiet that only comes after a long evening rain. The pavement glistened under the streetlights. Every reflection stretched thin like a memory. She hesitated by the door, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I should get going," she said softly. I could hear the reluctance in her tone, faint but there. "I'll walk you home," I offered before I even thought about it. She turned to me, one eyebrow raised. "That's not necessary." "I know," I said, "but I'd like to." For a second, I thought she might refuse. Then she smiled, small and tired but real, and nodded. "All right then." The rain had turned into a mist by the time we started walking. We shared my umbrella, one of those cheap, slightly crooked ones that always leans just enough to make both people a little wet. It forced us close together, our shoulders brushing every few steps. The streets smelled of damp leaves and earth. Somewhere, a distant car rolled through puddles, breaking the silence for a moment before it faded again. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone used to being alone, her pace steady, her gaze thoughtful. At first, we didn't talk much. It wasn't an awkward silence, more like the kind that feels alive, filled with everything words would only disturb. I could hear her breathing beside me, soft and even. Every time our arms touched, a small pulse of warmth ran through me, settling somewhere deep in my chest. After a while, she said, "You don't seem like someone who stays in one place for long." I smiled. "You can tell that from 2 coffees." She glanced at me with a knowing look. "You talk like you're waiting for something to begin." Her words lingered. I didn't answer right away because she was right. I was waiting, though I didn't know for what. Or maybe I did, and I just wasn't brave enough to admit it. We reached a quiet street lined with old houses and soft yellow porch lights. She stopped at one with ivy climbing the wall. "This is me," she said. I closed the umbrella, shaking off the rain. Water droplets fell like tiny sparks in the dim light. "Thank you," she added, her voice gentler now. "For what?" "For not treating me like a stranger," she said. And before I could reply, she reached out, lightly, and brushed her hand against my sleeve. Just that, a fleeting touch, but it carried more weight than anything we'd said that night. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat, then slipped away. "Good night," she whispered. I watched her climb the steps to her door, the sound of her heels soft against the wet stone. When she turned the key, she glanced back once, just enough to meet my eyes through the rain. And in that single look, something wordless passed between us, something quiet, tender, and utterly irreversible. I walked home slower than usual that night, my hand still warm where she'd touched me. After that night, seeing her became a quiet part of my routine. Not something we planned, but something that simply happened. Some evenings I'd find her at the cafe, sketching again, a cup of tea cooling beside her. Other times she'd text me, short messages, always gentle and precise. "The light is beautiful today," or "You like the way the sky looks right now." It wasn't flirting. It was something quieter, more real. We began to share little pieces of our lives. She told me about her garden, about how she still painted on weekends, but never showed anyone her work anymore. I told her about the new job I was trying to figure out, how the world sometimes felt too big and too fast. She had this way of listening, like every word mattered. I started to notice the way she tilted her head slightly when she focused, the soft crease that formed between her brows when she was trying not to smile. Sometimes, I'd help her carry groceries up the steps to her home. She'd always insist I didn't need to, and I'd always do it anyway. There was something grounding about being near her, about the scent of her home, the warmth of the wooden floors, the quiet rhythm of her world. Her house always smelled faintly of tea leaves and paint. The afternoon light would pour through the windows, dust drifting lazily in the beams. Once she caught me looking at one of her old paintings, a portrait half finished, the eyes left undone. "You didn't finish it," I said. She smiled faintly. Some things are better left incomplete. There was something in her tone, soft, sad, that made me want to reach for her hand. I didn't. I just stood there, feeling the weight of everything she wasn't saying. Those days blurred into a quiet rhythm. Coffee, laughter, shared walks. But in every pause, there was something unspoken. A hesitation, a warmth, a longing neither of us dared to name. Once, she brushed a strand of hair from my forehead while we talked. It was such a small gesture, but my breath caught all the same. Her fingers lingered just a second too long. She smiled, almost apologetically, then looked away. Moments like that began to happen often, a light touch on my arm as she passed, her hand brushing mine when we reached for the same cup. Always fleeting, always careful, but charged with something deep enough to make time falter. And every time I left her house, she walked me to the door. Always. She'd stand there as I put on my shoes, arms crossed loosely, that calm, unreadable smile playing on her lips. Then, as I stepped out, she'd whisper softly, "Take care." The door would close gently behind me, but her voice, that quiet warmth, would stay long after. And I started to realize that what we had wasn't about what was said. It was about everything that wasn't. It happened on one of those late evenings when the sky refused to turn dark, hanging somewhere between gold and gray. I'd stop by her place after work. She said she'd made too much tea and needed company to help her waste time. The house felt softer that day. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and rain. The windows half open, a breeze moving gently through the curtains. She was in a loose cardigan, sleeves pushed up, hair pinned carelessly. It wasn't the composed version of her I'd met months ago. It was something realer. We talked about ordinary things, her favorite books, my clumsy attempt at cooking, how she'd always wanted to visit the sea again. But somewhere between laughter and silence, something shifted. The pauses grew longer. Our voices dropped softer. I remember looking at her and realizing how familiar she'd become. Not just her voice or her smile, but the space she occupied in my thoughts. The way she made everything around her feel slower, safe. She was sitting by the window, her hand curled around mug. The light hit her face just right, warm, gentle, outlining every quiet story she'd ever lived through. I wanted to say something, but all that came out was a breath. "You're quiet," she said, glancing at me. "I'm just thinking," I replied. "About what?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "About how time feels different when I'm here." She looked down at her cup, her fingers tightening slightly around it. "Don't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because it makes it harder," she said. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes did. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't have to. There was a silence, heavy, fragile, the kind that holds too much truth to break easily. Finally, she sighed, setting the cup down. "You're young, you know. You'll find people who fit your life better than I ever could." "I'm not looking for someone to fit my life," I said quietly. "I just don't want to lose what this is." Her eyes met mine then, and for the first time, there was no guarded calm, no careful restraint. Just raw emotion. Fear. Longing. She stood slowly, stepping closer. Her hand brushed my arm, tracing lightly down on my wrist. The touch was hesitant, trembling, like she wasn't sure she should. "This shouldn't feel like this," she whispered. "But it does," I said. Her forehead leaned against mine. Not a kiss, not yet. Just that quiet closeness where breath becomes shared and the world falls away. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, a reminder that the storm hadn't passed. Inside, everything felt still, painfully beautifully still. Neither of us said another word. But in that silence, the confession was made. Not through what we said, but through what we finally stopped trying to hide. It was a few days after that moment by the window, the one we didn't talk about but couldn't forget. Since then, something delicate had changed between us. The way she spoke, the way her eyes lingered, the way I hesitated before leaving her doorstep. Everything felt suspended, like we were both standing at the edge of something we didn't know how to name. That night, it was raining again, the kind of rain that muffles the whole world. I hadn't planned to visit her, but when I passed her street and saw the lights still on in her living room, I stopped. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to make sure she was okay. Maybe because I just missed her. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, then relieved. "You're drenched," she said softly, pulling me inside before I could answer. The warmth of her home hit me. That familiar smell of paint and tea, mixed now with the faint scent of rain on her skin. She handed me a towel, her hands brushing mine as she did. Her touch was light, but my chest tightened all the same. We didn't talk much. She moved quietly around the room, lighting a candle when the lights flickered. The flame cast soft shadows across her face, tender, flickering, human. I sat on the couch, listening to the rain drum against the glass. Then I noticed it, the way her shoulders trembled. She was standing by the window, staring out into the dark, her arms folded as if trying to hold herself together. "Hey," I said gently. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer at first. Then, barely above a whisper, "Nothing. It's just been a long week." But I could see it, the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes glistened in the half-light. Whatever she was carrying, it was heavier than she wanted me to know. I stood, unsure of what to do. Words felt useless, so I did the only thing that felt right. I stepped closer and wrapped my arms around her. At first, she froze. Then slowly, her body softened against mine. Her arms came up, hesitant, then firm, sliding around my shoulders until she pulled me closer. Her cheek rested against my chest, warm and damp with tears she didn't try to hide anymore. For a long time, neither of us moved. The only sound was the rain and her breathing, uneven at first, then steady, syncing with mine. Her hands rested at my back, fingertips tracing faint, trembling circles. Every touch carried something unsaid, gratitude, fear, relief, everything language couldn't hold. "Just stay," she whispered, her voice breaking. So I did. We stayed like that, swaying slightly, the world outside forgotten. Time stopped meaning anything. The room, the storm, the candlelight, all of it blurred into something still and sacred. And in that silence, in that fragile human closeness, I realized what I'd been chasing wasn't her age or her mystery. It was this, the feeling of being completely seen and still held. Morning came softly, as if even the light didn't want to disturb what was left of the night. I woke to the faint sound of rain easing against the window, a slower rhythm now, like the world had exhaled. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I felt it, her presence beside me. Not in my arms this time, but close enough that I could hear her breathing, calm and even. We hadn't said much after she'd held me. We just sat there, side by side on the couch, her head resting lightly on my shoulder until the candle had burned down to nothing. The quiet between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was tender, like the silence that follows a truth finally spoken. She stirred when the light reached her face, opening her eyes slowly. There was no embarrassment, no rush to pull away. Just that familiar, steady calm she carried everywhere, softened now by something gentler. "Morning," I said, my voice low. She smiled faintly. "You stayed. You asked me to." She nodded, eyes drifting toward the window. "I'm glad you did." The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. She stood, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and for a moment I watched her move, unhurried, graceful, as if time itself had slowed to her pace. She poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me, her fingers brushing mine, a gesture so small, yet it sent a quiet warmth through my chest. We sat by the window again, just like the night we met. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still shining, scattered with puddles that caught the pale morning light. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full, rich, like a space we both needed to breathe in. Finally, she said, "You know this can't be simple." "I know," I said, "but I don't think it's supposed to be." She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, there was no wall between us. "No hositashchen, just honesty. I don't want to hurt you," she whispered. "You won't," I said. "You already did, the first time you smiled at me. Everything after that has only made it worth it." Her laughter came softly, somewhere between a sigh and a confession. She shook her head, eyes glistening, and reached across the table. Her hand found mine, steady this time, no tremor, no pause. For a moment, we just sat like that, hands clasped, the warmth of her skin grounding me in the quiet morning. The world outside moved again, cars passing, a child calling out in the distance, but inside, time still felt different, slower. "Kinda." She looked out the window, then back at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "You make the world feel still." I smiled. "So do you." And for the first time since I met her, I didn't feel the need to know what would happen next. Some stories don't end in promises. They end in peace. And in that morning light, with her hand in mine, peace was enough.